Welcome back. I'm Michael Bull, and this is the Commercial Real Estate Show. Today we're talking with Bob O'Brien, Global Real Estate Sector Leader with Deloitte, and the title of our show is End of Expansion Cycle or Beginning of a Robust Economy. And Bob, before the break, we were talking about where we are in the cycle for maybe some of the various property types. And so what do you think about industrial real estate?
Well, industrial, I would generally view positively. I think what we've seen is with the rise in same-day or one-day shipping from the e-commerce vendors, there's been a real demand for industrial space. And that will likely sustain itself into 2017. I do think a risk is any significant changes in U.S. trade policy that negatively impact global trade. That's the risk, I think, in industrial.
Okay. And what do you think about hospitality? It seems like in that business they can change their rates every 5 minutes.
Yeah, and the issue I think in hospitality really is going to be around supply. From 2007 through 2015, there was greater demand growth than there was supply being added to the market. 2016, that switched, where you had more supply being added than you had demand growth. And in 2017, looks like that'll repeat itself as well. So that is going to have an impact on RevPAR, on average daily rates, on occupancy at the hotels. And so things may be a little bit less robust, let's put it that way, in the hospitality real estate side than it's been over the past few years.
Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of people do like to try to time the cycles. I know I've talked to some of the investors that I deal with, and I'll call them in a robust economy like this, and they say, Michael, thanks for calling us. I appreciate you checking with us, but we only buy in a recession. So call us back when the market changes. So when you look at where we are in the cycle for some of these property types, should you also kind of consider the market that it's in? Are you one of the 5 gateway markets, and may improve faster and change faster, or?
We're actually generally a bit more positive on what I'll call some of the secondary and tertiary markets that may not be quite as fully priced as the gateway markets. Gateway markets are great long-term holds and great places for long-term value creation. But at this point in the cycle, people would look at gateway markets and say, well, they're pretty fully priced. They look at secondary and tertiary markets, they may see more opportunities.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've certainly seen that in Atlanta, where we're headquartered. There seems to be a lot of buyer interest here. So if you own a property in Atlanta, give me a call. We'll get it sold for you. So let's talk about the Trump effect, Bob. Everybody's trying to gauge what he's going to be able to get done and how it's going to impact the economy. So how's it going to impact the commercial real estate and the cycle moving forward?
Well, I think some of his stated priorities around tax reform, around regulatory reform, and infrastructure spend are all very positives for real estate. The question is, how will he be able to enact them? Will he be able to enact them? And will other uncertainties undermine that? With respect to regulatory reform, we saw lenders pull back a little bit in 2016 in terms of commercial real estate lending, in part because of regulatory pressure. And if the banks have less of a regulatory challenge to deal with in terms of real estate lending, particularly on what's been called highly volatile commercial real estate, that should create an opportunity for real estate developers to perhaps get financing at better rates, more availability of financing. Ultimately that could lead to greater supply here in the next few years. And
do you think that's one of the easier things for him to do?
I do think that would be one of the easier things for him to do from at least from a regulatory rulemaking standpoint. Repealing Dodd-Frank, that'll be more challenging, right? Because ultimately you'd have to get legislative approval around that.
Yeah, you just can't tweet that, right?
Yeah, there may be ways of tweaking the implementation of Dodd-Frank, but you can't just make the law go away without a legislative
No, I meant tweet
activity.
it. You put it out on Twitter and get it done.
No, that doesn't necessarily work.
So what else in Trump's plans could impact the cycle? You know, one of the things he's trying to do is reduce the tax rate, right? Corporate tax rate, maybe personal tax rate. Does that mean more jobs, and does that really extend the cycle for the office market?
Well, ultimately, it depends on how that is implemented, but it could be very positive for the broader economy, which is positive for real estate. It could create some unique challenges for real estate as well, though. So, for example, REITs have a tax-favored status under the current tax regime. How much will that tax-favored status really be valued if there's significant tax reform and lowering of the corporate rates? Will REITs decide that they'd rather be C corporations rather than REITs, for example, under a different tax regime? So for some real estate companies, they're going to want to monitor the tax reform pretty closely.
Okay. And what about consumer spending? As if he can reduce tax rates for individuals, we're Americans, right? We're going to go spend it. Does that help retail?
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of tax reduction as stimulus, right? Because it does encourage both consumer spend, but then also individual investment, both of which I think is good for real estate.
Okay. Would you say overall, Bob, then, that after Trump won the election, that your thoughts of the robust economy, the cycle got extended a little bit there? Or, was there enough positive stuff coming out of the Trump leadership right now to say, yeah, maybe we thought we had X years, but now we have X plus some?
Well, I think if he's successful in driving economic growth by doing some of the things he says he's going to do, it should impact economic growth, again, around regulatory and tax reform and infrastructure spending. Yeah. I do think that does extend the cycle.
Yeah. So what's the Vegas odds on him doing that? We got to.
I think it's interesting. Like, infrastructure spend is bipartisan, right? I think there's interest on both sides of the aisle to do that. So I would view that as pretty good odds. I think tax reform's pretty complex, and you've got to get it done relatively quickly before you get to the next cycle of congressional elections, and so that makes that a little bit more challenging. Regulatory reform, because a lot of that can be driven simply by the executive branch, my guess is he will make progress on that.
Yeah, that would be helpful. How about repatriation? If we get some of these corporate funds back into the U.S., might he be able to get that done? How tough is that going to be, and what impact might that have?
Yeah, so that ultimately will play into tax reform, right? And so I think there's a significant possibility that would be part of any sort of tax reform package, but then you've got to assess the odds of getting that tax reform done. We think that it's more likely than not tax reform will happen here in 2017, but it's far from a sure thing.
Right, like we said before, you can't just put that on Twitter, right? That's
heavy duty legislative work to get something like that done.
Right. All right. So 10 more years. So until 2027, I can be doing the Snoopy dance.
Yeah, 2026.
26.
Don't go to 2027.
Okay, 2026. So I count my chickens until then. All right, Bob, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your information. It's high quality as always. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Michael. Always a pleasure to talk to you and to your listeners.
Great. Thank you. And stay tuned. We're going to have more on our show title today, End of Expansion Cycle or Beginning of a Robust Economy. We have some more economists and analysts joining us. And be sure you connect with us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook. You can find all our connections at CREshow.com. Stay with us. We'll have more right after this short break. Hey there, thanks for checking out the Commercial Real Estate Show. Don't miss a video of special interest to you. Be sure to subscribe below. And if you appreciate the videos, be sure and thank our sponsors. There's a link to more information about them in the description. For more videos, podcasts, and articles, check out CREshow.com.